Mark.
Scene 4, take 1.
The mindless depletion of our natural resources is challenging our comforts, and also the movement of this mother-grabbing thing.
Mark.
Scene 4, take 2.
Stand by.
The mindless depletion of our natural resources is challenging this very goddamn mother-grabbing thing that doesn't seem to work. Don't be mad. Don't be mad, Jim.
We're going to have something. Rolling and recording. Mark.
Scene 4, take 3.
If we ignore the environmental damage we do while trying to meet our energy demands, we will find ourselves not only without gasoline and electricity of us, but of
I was going too fast.
No, it was my fault.
Oh.
We will find ourselves not only without gasoline and electricity, but also without water to drink. Oh, shit. Water to drink. Oh, Rick, I'm sorry, Jim. Man, this is good wine, you know. Delicious.
Scene 5, take 1.
Today, lakes and rivers all over the country are dying and reversing their qualities because, oh, shit, I'm sorry. And reversing their qualities becomes more and more difficult. Don't be mad, Jim. Don't be mad, please.
Barbara, I'm going to let you begin first by picking out who you think's the honest person over there, if indeed there is such a breed.
I really have no idea.
All right, my dear. What do you say we just go out and dance? We'll come back later, all right? Oh, my.
Mighty.
It's going to be another one of those beep-beep shows. Okay, Benny Walker.
Are you telling me that Rod Serling is out there?
Yes.
That extremely talented writer, director, producer, and all-around good fellow? Well, bring him out here.
Mr. Rod Serling, would you come in, please, and tell it to Groucho?
How did you like that introduction?
I loved it. I love it. It's a lie, but I loved it.
Of course it's a lie, but I had to say something to fill the time. How long have you been writing, Rod?
Oh, since the early days of radio, Groucho, in 1946.
You don't look that old.
I am.
Now, you've won practically all the honors that you can get for television writing. What do you consider your best play?
Oh, I think there are 3 of them that I'm most proud of, Groucho. One would be The Comedian with Mickey Rooney. The other is Patterns, and the third would be Requiem for a Heavyweight, which we just shot as a motion picture in New York City.
Oh. Did you direct it?
I couldn't direct traffic. That's why I was interested when you introduced me as a director. I've never directed anything.
It's not nearly as tough as writing. Let me explain that to you.
I'm sure not.
That is the toughest job of all, the writer.
What do you mean by the corrupting influence of Hollywood and big money? What is that? What are you saying?
I didn't mean to suggest that corruption had a geographical tag, that it was necessarily the corruption of Hollywood. What I tried to suggest dramatically was that when you get into the big money, particularly in the kind of detonating, exciting, explosive, overnight way that our industry permits, there are certain blandishments that a guy can succumb to, and many do.
Such as?
A preoccupation with status, with the symbols of status, with the heated swimming pool that's 10 feet longer than the neighbors, with the big car, with the concern about billing. All these things. In a sense, rather minute things, really, in context, but that become disproportionately large in a guy's mind.
And also, because those become so large, what becomes small?
I think probably the really valuable things. And I know this sounds corny and sort of buckwheatish to say that things like having a family, being concerned with raising children, being concerned with where they go to school, being concerned with a good marital relationship, all these things I think are of the essence. Unfortunately, and the problem, as I tried to dramatize in The Velvet Alley, was that the guy who makes a success is immediately assailed by everybody. And you suddenly find yourself having to compromise along the line, giving so many hours to work and a disproportionate number of fewer hours to family. And this is inherent in our business.
One of your most famous television shows of all time, as far as I'm concerned, was Requiem for a Heavyweight. Is this your favorite television writing?
Well, it's my favorite in that I put more of myself into it. It was a story of a composite of fighters that I've known, and I did some fighting myself. I have the unique distinction of being the only fighter who had to be carried both in and out of the ring. I used to fight as a catchweight in Golden Gloves and in the service, but my trainer and 2 or 3 other major league fighters are all very much characterized in the show. And I enjoyed it. Playoffs 90, lately lamented and departed, was an exceptionally fine program, and they did some marvelous things on the show.
Rod, you were telling me you're a native of the state of New York. You still return there once a year?
Once a year for a period of about 3 months. I take wife, dogs, children, not necessarily in that order, cat, and what we have by way of a menagerie there in my household. We keep a boat back there, and this is our 3-month serene period out of the Hollywood area. And all the phones, there are 14 people to a party line, and they're the crank-up kind. And people get so frustrated trying to reach me, they stop trying to reach me. That's why I like this 3-month sojourn.
Often I find that within the framework of the science fiction or fantasy genre, the use of traveling back in time is a very effective way of producing contrasts, of producing a kind of a freewheeling storytelling device, which is why I used going back in time. And there's another reason, which very much relates to any discussion of creativity, is that every writer, and I don't think there are any, I can't conceive of anybody not falling into this pattern who writes, has certain special loves, certain special hang-ups, certain special preoccupations and predilections. In my case, it's a hunger to be young again, a desperate hunger to go back where it all began. And I think you'll see this as a running thread through a lot of things that I write. And part of creativity, of course, is being able to have the capacity to convey that kind of hunger, that kind of nostalgia, that kind of bittersweet feeling to those who have never had it.
I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. His name is Mike, and he lives with probably the only man I know who commutes regularly between here and the Twilight Zone, our special guest, Rod Serling.
Hi,
Are you two always this much in love?
Oh, yeah. This is my son, Betty.
Well, I love him. Rod, it always impresses me that, people think dogs and their owners have affinities. Why did you pick Irish setters?
We've always loved them, Betty, and I'd never had any until about, perhaps 12 years ago, and a runaway Irish setter arrived at our doorstep.
Irish sweater?
An Irish sweater arrived at our doorstep, and we fell in love with him. His name was Bo, and he was with us about 7 years. Then we got a female who was part of a marriage that produced Michael.
So but you still have Michael?
We have Mother Maggie, who is Mikey's mom, and we have the klutz here, the moose.
Oh, but he's the nicest moose. So you've had him since he was born,
Yeah,
really. So setters found you.
That's
you
right,
You didn't find him. Now, I know you have a place in Upper New York, don't you, up in Finger Lakes?
New York, right.
Oh, it must be beautiful up there.
Lovely.
Does he go with you, or does he wait here?
Mikey and Maggie both come with us, and they fly in the aircraft in the baggage compartment, and then get off quite hurt and upset by the fact that they didn't fly first class.
There's not a major difference in writing for the two, live or film. It's a difference in technique, which is much more machine-like than it is artistic. In the case of moving from live to film, you write with principally more of an eye toward the camera. You produce your show out of chronology in film. You might shoot the last scene first, then the first scene, and a middle scene. You don't shoot it, as they say in showbiz, from the top. But a writer is a writer, and a story is a story. The things that make a story good and honest and probing and real apply to any kind of writing media, be it live television, film television, movies, theater, what all. It matters not one whit how you do it on a proscenium or in front of a camera. If the words are right, if the story is meaningful, it's going to be relatively successful. Within the confines, within the limited areas that we write within in television, if you've got a point to make, I think generally you can make it quite cogently and meaningfully. This is not to say that you
can attack all the social problems extant, you don't attack them in television. It's not a medium geared, at least at present, to support the vehicle of social criticism that writers have been known to exercise over the years. We, in a sense, have to pre-censor ourselves and don't deal in the very meaningful, very controversial issues of the day. But as I say, there are an awful lot of things to talk about in television.
Do you look at it as entertainment or as an art form?
That's the oft-asked, properly asked question. And in informal moments when you can buttonhole a network executive, he will say to you that indeed no, it is not the responsibility of the networks to enlighten, to educate, to lift the intellectual values and interests of a populace. Not at all. They are simply there to reflect what are the entertainment tastes of the masses. They have forever said this, not publicly, but in any private conversation, this is principally what they will say. Of late, and I have never been a plea copper, I've never begged off an issue before, but I'm beginning to believe that there is a strange groundswell amongst the American populace, the citizenry, that would seek out an escape away from reality of late, that their tastes lie much toward the entertainment quality rather than the cerebral quality.
I don't think there's any question of that at all.
I think it is not only evidenced in television, but more pronouncedly in the proscenium drama. What has Broadway produced as a vehicle of social criticism that in any way harkens back to the Odetzian days or the G.B. Shaws or the Ibsens? When a play made a point, by God, they had an axe to grind about what was a current social evil, and they made it.
When a play moved you as a human being.
Precisely, and for that reason it was written.
Is television good?
Some television's wonderful. Some television is exciting and promising and has vast potential. Some television is mediocre and bad. But I think it has promise, Mike. I think this can conceivably be a real art form.
Did you have difficulty in creating and selling the idea of the Twilight Zone series?
It was sort of like being able to poke hot butter in a wildcat's ear. It was very difficult. The whole concept of science fiction and fantasy has always been looked a little askance at by all the powers that be. It's one of the old saws in motion pictures that fantasies don't sell. Science fiction is for 11-year-olds. The occult, the ghost story, is for a very limited coterie of viewers or readers. But I think what happened is that the National Aviation and Space Agency did more for us than a sponsor, than an actor, than anyone. Science fiction no longer was fiction. The Buck Rogers of yesterday is the real astronaut of today. The incredible events that were cartooned 25 years ago are daily events now. And science fiction has caught up with us in terms of its reality. So now we're dealing with a slightly extended imaginative idea, but in every true sense, I think science fiction is now believed to be what it precisely has been all the years, a projection of what's going to happen tomorrow. And for this reason, I think we're dealing with a much broader audience.
What led you to this field for... Of course, see, I love science fiction, but I'm an aficionado, not a contributor. And I say this, you know, with no stupid, dumb humility at all. I'm purely a Johnny-come-lately. I am perhaps the least scientifically knowledgeable man in the whole writing group. And I bow with great deference and respect to the real masters, you know, Asimov and Bob Heinlein and Sturgeon and all the rest of them. And these, of course, and yourself included, because you write pure science fiction. I can adapt science fiction, I think, quite adequately, but I can't create it on an original level. I'd have to preface my response by saying that I think the networks have traditionally and almost ritualistically shortchanged the science fiction audience, both qualitatively and quantitatively. I don't think, number one, they've given the proper respect to science fiction as a legitimate area of literary attempt. So number one, I think, first of all, it's a high-level literary form. And number two, I think it's much more than a small coterie of loyal viewers who have read amazing stories and want to go on. I think it's a sizable group, particularly amongst the young, because we live in a society which is so technologically improved and which is so scientifically oriented now that indeed this is simply a reflection of what is the time around us now. But if I had a group of stories to select, I think by virtue of its mass media form, I would try to choose those stories that, though even science fiction and genre, would be tellable in terms of the most acceptable human terms that we now know. I would probably shy away from the year 2500. I would much rather deal in 1998. The hardware that I use, I think, should be identifiable. Different, of course, because it changes every year. But I would be more prone to think in terms of, I'd like to know what happens Thursday, not in the next century.
Well, depending, of course, on the thematic treatment you're using, if you have the temerity to try to dramatize a theme that involves any particular social controversy currently extant, then you're in deep trouble.
For instance?
A racial theme, for example. The case in point, I think, a show I did for the Steel Hour some years ago, 3 years ago, called Noon on Doomsday, which was a story which purported to tell what was the aftermath of the alleged kidnapping in Mississippi of the Till Boy, the young Chicago Negro. And I wrote the script using black and white initially. Then it was changed to suggest an unnamed foreigner. Then the locale was moved from the South to New England, and I'm convinced they'd have gone up to Alaska or the North Pole and using Eskimos as a possible minority, except I suppose the costume problem was of sufficient severity not to attempt it. But it became a lukewarm, vitiated, emasculated kind of show.
You went along with it?
All the way. I protested. I went down fighting, as most television writers do. Thinking, in a strange, oblique, philosophical way, that better say something than nothing. In this particular show, though, by the time they had finished taking Coca-Cola bottles off the set because the sponsor claimed that this had Southern connotations, suggesting to what depth they went to make this a clean, antiseptically, rigidly acceptable show. Why it bore no relationship at all to what we had purported to say initially.
Pre-censorship. How does that work?
Pre-censorship is a practice, I think, of most television writers. I can't speak for all of them. This is the prior knowledge of the writer of those areas which are difficult to try to get through. And so a writer will shy away from writing those things which he knows he's going to have trouble with on a sponsorial or an agency level. We practice it all the time. We just do not write those themes which we know are going to get into trouble. It's a combination of culprits in this case, Mike. It's partly network. It's principally agency and sponsor. In many ways, I think it's the audience themselves.
How do you mean?
Well, I'll give you an example. About a year ago, roughly 11 or 12 months ago, on the Lassie show. This is a story usually told by Sheldon Leonard, who was then associated with the show. Lassie was having puppies, and I have two little girls, then aged 5 and 3, who are greatly enamored of this beautiful collie, and they watched the show with great interest, and Lassie gave birth to puppies. And Mike, it was probably one of the most tasteful and delightful and warm things depicting what is this wondrous thing that is birth. And after the show, I think there were many congratulations all around because it was a lovely show. The sort of thing I'd love my kids to watch, to show them what is the birth process and how marvelous it is. They got many, many cards and letters. Sample card from the Deep South, this was. If I wanted my kids to watch sex shows, I wouldn't have had them turn on that. I could take them to burlesque shows. And as a result of the influx of mail, many of the cards, incidentally, as Sheldon tells it, were postmarked at identical moments, all in the same handwriting, but each was counted as a singular piece of mail. And as a result, the directive went down that there would be no shows having anything to do with puppies, that is, in the actual birth process. Well, obviously, it is this wild lunatic fringe of letter writers that greatly affect what the sponsor has in mind.
You can understand the position of the sponsor, can't you?
In many ways, I suppose I can. He's there to push a product.
He has a considerable stake, thus, in what goes on the air.
Most assuredly. And in those cases where there is a problem of public taste, in which there is a concern for eliciting negative response from a large mass of people, I can understand why the guys are frightened.
Sure.
I don't understand, Mike, for example, other evidences and instances of intrusion by sponsors. For example, on Playhouse 90, not a year ago, a lovely show called Judgment at Nuremberg. I think probably one of the most competently done and artistically done pieces that 90's done all year. In it, as you recall, mention was made of gas chambers.
Yeah.
And the line was deleted, cut off the soundtrack. And it mattered little to these guys that the gas involved in concentration camps was cyanide, which bore no resemblance, physical or otherwise, to the gas used in stoves. They cut the line.
Because the sponsor was...
He did not want that awful association made between what was the horror and the misery of Nazi Germany with the nice chrome wonderfully antiseptically clean, beautiful kitchen appliances that they were selling. Now, this is an example of sponsor interference which is so beyond logic and which is so beyond taste. This I rebel against. In 11 or 12 years of writing, Mike, I can lay claim to at least this. I have never written beneath myself. I've never written anything that I didn't want my name attached to. I have probed deeper in some scripts, and I've been more successful in some than others. But all of them that have been on, you know, I'll take my lick. They're mine, and that's the way I wanted them. Somebody asked me the other day if this means that I'm going to be a meek conformist, and my answer is no. I'm just acting the role of a tired nonconformist, and I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to
fight anymore.
I don't want to have to battle sponsors and agencies. I don't want to have to push for something that I want and have to settle for second best. I don't want to have to compromise all the time, which in essence is what the television writer does if he wants to put on controversial themes. I think it's criminal that we're not permitted to make dramatic note of social evils as they exist, of controversial themes as they are inherent in our society. I think it's ridiculous that drama, which by its very nature should make a comment on those things that affect our daily lives, is in the position, at least in terms of television drama, of not being able to take this stand.
I was traumatized into writing by war events, by going through a war in a combat situation and feeling the desperate sense of the terrible need for some sort of therapy. Get it out of my gut, write it down. This is the way it began for me. But I don't have the problem that George had, that George poses as the problem of translation and communication, because I came back with 11 million other guys who had very similar problems. So it was not unique, nor was it not to be expected, that of this class of 46, we had very special problems that we were going to write about.
I'm not suggesting that we suddenly develop a gigantic school of protest here, or of social comment, in which we preoccupy ourselves with commentative drama, this sort of thing. But I do believe the nature of the times now demand that television takes positions, that it exposes both sides of controversy. I've yet, for example, I keep thinking this awfully, not to inject a political note into this, but I have a feeling we're dealing with a faceless enemy in terms of the Vietnamese. At least when Jack Warner ran Warner Brothers, I knew what a Japanese soldier looked like, albeit a cartoon version. He had gigantic teeth and myopic vision, and he ran around assaulting nuns and torturing Clark Gable. And indeed, the Nazi was the unregenerative animal with a whip. And he pointed with the whip for these thousands to go into that gas chamber and so and so. Now television gives us Hogan's Heroes. And next year, I suppose it'll be the Merry Men of Auschwitz.
Yes.
And a big a dance thing on the Death March of Bataan.
Yeah, ballet maybe.
A ballet of that sort. You see, I think this is a distortion. Now, when we're talking about, if indeed they want to have the temerity to suggest what is a moment in American history or world history, do it properly.
Hi, Rod. Tom Holden, WKBN News. You've just signed a peace petition. Obviously, you have some views on President Nixon's announced blockade of North Vietnamese ports. Would you care to tell us about them?
I think pretty much everything that's there to be said has been said, Tom. I think it's an act of paranoia, damn close to insanity. I think what it does is to prolong an open-ended bloodletting, which I find close to maniacal. And I feel very emotional about this. I think we've got to get out. We've got to get out quickly. And before we shed one more life, because in my view, every life is nothing less than an act of predatory murder. Theirs and ours. Most television fiction that I watch has very little relevance. I think it's one thing to say we will now have a program called Mod Squad, say, and we will have one black man and one Oriental and one Hawaiian to show this marvelous melting pot concept. But I think, Jim, that's altogether phony. I don't think that's, I think at best condescension and at worst exploitation. The fact is that we have so distorted the pure ethnic minority over the years by making every black man a banjo player and the village idiot and the coward that suddenly we're going to reverse switch. He is now a brain scientist or an atomic scientist or any one of an equal distortion at the other end. Needless to say, I'd much prefer the distortion on the good scale, on the good side of the scale. But all television fiction I find quite irrelevant and quite unrelated.
It's reminiscent of television in its early days when indeed there was certainly a race problem in those days. It wasn't out in the street. It wasn't loud in our ears. It wasn't infesting our gut, our conscious gut as it is today, but by God, there was anguish amongst minorities then as there is now.
I remember that play you wrote, The Town Turned to Dust.
Oh, yeah, which, well, you see, then you assaulted the straw men who were acceptable as minority groups. Mexicans, American Indians, Eskimos, beaten down, downtrodden peasants under the Tsar. These were the minorities, but not the Negro. Now, consequently, I think the purpose, the point of a dramatic show, which is used as a vehicle of social criticism, is to involve an audience, to show them wherein their guilt lies, or at least, indeed, their association. But when you're talking about a bunch of cavalrymen knocking off a bunch of poor redskins and putting them into a reservation, the audience need to have no association, certainly no guilt. How many Indians have they pushed into a reservation? But if indeed you talk about a denial of a man putting his garbage can next to yours, whether he's fought in Vietnam or wherever, by virtue of his color, now you're getting into a universal guilt, which they should feel, or at least in part understand.
Maybe it's too close to home. Maybe it shakes them up too much. Maybe that's not what they want from television.
It's a moot question, but I have always maintained, Jim, that any audience with any kind of brain at all will respond to that which is exciting.
I agree with you. This is something that we must believe.
Now, you may have to tell them a story of prejudice in parable form, in which they may step aside as third persons and cluck and say how awful we treat our minority groups. But at least they know that it's an evil, and they will recognize it as such. And by osmosis or some incredible process, will somewhere along the line be faced with a situation in which they too may have to exercise a prejudice and be conscious of it as an evil. Now, on Twilight Zone, for example, done during just as timorous a time as any other time, we made a comment on prejudice, on conformity, on intolerance, on censorship. But it's easy to do it when you're talking about Buck Rogers isn't allowed to write his memoirs in the way he wants to write them.
Yes.
So he puts on his backpack, his rocket pack, and he zooms over to the publisher. And they applaud and laugh and think how exciting and interesting. Now, it may well be that the inner message may never get through, but I think peripherally it does get through. I hark back now, Bernie, to a very effective documentary that I saw on NBC called Same Blood, Same Mud, with Frank McGee, I believe. The footage, the combat footage was tremendously, I hate to use the word exciting, we're talking of death now.
Yes,
Let's say that it was stunning, that it was horrendous, that it moved you, it created a reaction. But Frank McGee disturbed me because he would interview the white soldier and he would say, what do you think of your Negro colleague? And the white soldier would look at him and say, what do you mean, what do I think of him? He's a GI, he's on my right, he covers me on the attack, he does this. And McGee would cluck and say, my gosh, listen to that. Yeah, and I kept thinking, why are you amazed, Mr. McGee? Yeah. In the province of combat, when you stake your life?
How could it be any other way?
How could it be any other way? Yeah. And more to the point would have been, what happens to that Negro soldier, having lived through this incredibly strange, colorless world, say, for a period of a horrendous 12 or 13 months, and he goes back to the state of California, and under the tutelage of our governor there, tries to exist in a society in which there is a public law on record which denies him proper housing by virtue of the color of his skin. How does he feel then? Let's take our camera into that chap's living room.
If indeed this is the bag, if this is what young people want to do, you know, retire from the living and go to a commune and then grow grass and cart addictive drugs or the profits thereof across state lines, that's fine, if that's what their bag is. I will not sit in judgment on what a man wants to do, so long as it doesn't hurt me. But what I took vast issue with, and Easy Rider, if you'll forgive me from adding this little parenthetic aside here, was that the essence of Fonda's philosophy was that those who turn their back and get on the motorcycle, like Captain America and his sidekick, and go off to a commune are the good guys. And the people who remain behind in the establishment are the bad guys. And this I reject as a philosophy. The people who, I don't think you're going to cure cancer on a commune. You're not going to settle the problems of this decay of cities in a commune. You're not going to respond to what is the desperate divisiveness of our society on a commune. You can make love and have a ball, but you can't respond to what are the desperate needs of this moment. And the people who stay in the rat race and give fight to it and battle it, I think therein is where courage lies.
Well, I think, first of all, every professor should take a cram course in what are the problems of our time as they relate to the young.
we don't have, I don't think, except in strangely primitive, vicarious way, any real knowledge of what bugs you people, of what turns you off, of what concerns you, of what gives you aches and grievances, of what gives you this desperate sense of impatience. I think it's altogether customary and painful that, and I share the instinct with my own children, that when they come with this problem of the aged, the problem of the hungry, the problem of the have-not, and I say to them in my old man fashion, well, no, look, we've had hunger, we've had geriatric problems, we've had the problems of the put upon, of the ethnic minorities and the rest of it. These things will come out all right. They say, no, they won't come out all right. Because the fact that you have them and I have them means that they're not going to come out all right.
You've got a new series coming up called The Twilight Zone. You are writing as well as acting executive producer on this one. Who controls the final product? You or the sponsor?
We have what I think, at least theoretically anyway, because it hasn't really been put into practice yet, a good working relationship, where in questions of taste, in questions of the art form itself, in questions of drama, I'm the judge, because this is my medium and I understand it. I'm a dramatist for television. This is the area I know. I've been trained for it. I've worked for it for 12 years, and the sponsor knows his product, but he doesn't know mine. So when it comes to the commercials, I leave that up to him. When it comes to the story content, he leaves it up to me.
Has nothing been changed in the...
We changed in 18 scripts, Mike. We have had one line changed, which again was a little ludicrous, but of insufficient basic concern within the context of the story, not to put up a fight. On a bridge of a British ship, a sailor calls down to the galley and asks, in my script, for a pot of tea, because I believe that it's constitutionally acceptable in the British Navy to drink tea.
Yeah.
One of my sponsors happens to sell instant coffee, and he took great umbrage, or at least minor umbrage anyway, with the idea of saying tea. Well, we had a couple of swings back and forth, nothing serious, and we decided we'd ask for a tray to be sent up to the bridge.
Is pre-censorship, though, involved? Are you simply writing easy?
In this particular area, no, because we're dealing with a half-hour show, which cannot probe like a 90, which doesn't use scripts as vehicles of social criticism. These are strictly for entertainment.
These are potboilers.
Oh, no, I wouldn't call them potboilers at all. No, these are very adult, I think high-quality, half-hour, extremely polished films. But because they deal in the areas of fantasy and imagination and science fiction and all of those things, there's no opportunity to cop a plea or chop an axe or anything.
Well, you're not going to be able to cop a plea or chop an axe because you're going to be obviously working so hard on the Twilight Zone that, in essence, for the time being and for the foreseeable future, you've given up on writing anything important for television, right?
Yeah. Again, this is a semantic thing. Important for television, I don't know. If by important you mean I'm not going to try to delve into current social problems dramatically, you're quite right, I'm not. But, Mike, I'm not... Again, this sounds defensive and it probably sounds phony, but I'm not nearly as concerned with the money to be made on this show as I am with the quality of it, and I can prove that. I have a contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer which guarantees me something in the neighborhood of $250,000 over a period of 3 years. This is a contract I'm trying to break and get out of, so I can devote time to a series which is very iffy, which is a very problematical thing. It's only guaranteed 26 weeks, and if it only goes 26 weeks and stops, I'll have lost a great deal of money. But I would rather take the chance and do something I like, something I'm familiar with, something that has a built-in challenge to it.
You mentioned that the world is more or less ready for these way-out science fiction stories, but you still deal a lot in the supernatural, don't you?
Well, we touch upon principally in the area of fantasy, much more than science fiction. I think science fiction is the more readily acceptable of the story forms, but science fiction in television is most difficult to do because of the limitations of budget. Unfortunately, we haven't the time or the money of a George Pal at Metro, for example, who'll spend 3 or 4 days shooting one optical effect at the cost of $30,000 or $40,000. Our budget's a small one, and of necessity, we have to stay away from space and spaceships and those items which are relatively expensive. In the coming season, I think we'll probably deal with perhaps 1 out of 4 being science fiction, 2 out of 3 being straight fantasy, and the 4th being a little neither here nor there, fish nor fowl, very oddball things.
And what was the reaction to it in general? I mean, the first year, what happened?
Of course, you see, you have to gauge that in the strange arithmetic of television, which is very close to insanity. I think in its best run, Twilight Zone got roughly a 31 or a 32 share, which in television terms says that it is a mild success. It is not a runaway hit, it's not Gunsmoke, and it's a very questionable item as to whether or not we'll renew it if indeed something else comes along that looks much more publicly acceptable. It's sufficiently healthy to warrant their continuing to take a look at it. Now, what that 31 share meant was approximately 25 million people watching, which is a fair-sized audience. That's more than watched Shakespeare, you know, during the first 100 years. But in the strange, again, as I say, the strange arithmetic of television, this was not considered a major show. Oddly enough, the show became more popular after it went off the air in terms of the name Twilight Zone being kind of interchangeable with, you know, strange little witticisms throughout our language. It became a funny little colloquialism that people used.
Do you still get reactions to Twilight Zone now that it's in syndication?
Oh, yeah, Jim, because that's that marvelous phenomenon of television. It lends immortality, forgive me, to almost everything. And, of course, we go from generation to generation. The grammar school kid who first viewed television is now in college, and a brand new group is coming up. But we get considerable fan mail, and including, oddly enough, several manuscripts per week offering to be done on Twilight Zone. I think overall, it lacked consistency. It wasn't a good show every week. It wasn't a good show sometimes 3 weeks running. But judging it on the basis of other television shows, I think we maintained a reasonable consistency. I think we had what I would also attribute to a show like Playhouse 90. We showed effort constantly. I think at times we showed ingenuity and creativity. I don't think we borrowed from anyone. I think we created more than we aped.
Are you at odds with the network over Night Gallery, or do you not want to talk about that?
Oh, no, not really. They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery. It's somebody else's. And I only write a few of the scripts, and I front the show.
It's not yours.
It doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all. Some of the shows are quite good and quite interesting, but it's not science fiction, and it ceases to be fantasy. It's sort of a quick run through a cemetery. And it tries to compete with shows which are more popular than it is, namely Mannix, which is very action-packed and full of violence, and I suppose of its type, of its genre, it's very well done. But that wasn't what Night Gallery was supposed to be about, Dick. It was supposed to be a much more cerebral exercise. It was supposed to be much more diversified in its approach to things. It could be all things, science fiction and fantasy and the occult and the bizarre. But unfortunately, it's been an inconsistent show. But it may do very well. I just wish they'd use somebody else other than me, that's all.
What you're talking about is loss of control, then, I suppose. Did you ever have control over the phone?
I thought I had at one point until the phone didn't ring for several weeks. And then I kept wondering, when are they going to ask me? And they never asked me. They've been very nice. They've been very gentle and very good-hearted and warm and very unhostile. But unfortunately, that doesn't come with creative control. And I think in all medium, no matter be it film or TV, the writers should exercise a great deal of control.
The instinct of creativity must be followed by the act, the physical act of putting it down for a sense of permanence. Once you get that prod, that emotional jar, that I have witnessed something, or I have felt something, or I have seen something, or through observation, I have been moved by an event, I think the answer is get it down quickly, write it down. Now, very often, by virtue of the very enormity of the emotion, you will write it down in perhaps a distorted fashion, or an improper fashion, or an incorrect fashion, or your values may be a little juxtaposed. You may be too moved by the emotion. You haven't stepped far enough away back to get a perspective of the event. But I think as a basic overall thing, the clue to the writer, to the creator, is don't let it die a boarding in the head. Don't let it exist as just a simple memory that will move you or will conjure up a beautiful tune later on. Let us say that in our analysis of the art of creativity, we have uncovered the following truths and verities: that creativity is an altogether personal thing. It's an art that cannot be taught normally. It's a demanding, frustrating, challenging facet of the human experience that, by and large, one can create so long as he is ingenious, novel, different, imaginative, as opposed to the more sedentary and staid professions in which the use of the imagination is not paramount. The guy that fixes the pipe can be competent and skillful, amazingly so, but putting one pipe on another doesn't require an act of creativity. I think these are the truths that we seem to have touched upon. Does anybody have anything to say, sort of en passant here, in passing?
Well, just the fact that that does not become a creative act until this man finds a new way of doing it. Until
good.
this man fixes a pipe in a way or solves a problem in a way in which,
Absolutely.
no one has ever done it.
I stand corrected, Steve. Build a better mousetrap. That's an act of creativity. I wish more good writers would put themselves and their own works to a test. I wish they would write. I too often hear from students, for example, or from anyone. I get this in the mail via correspondence in sizable, voluminous amounts. I'm not a writer, but I've got this idea, and if you could just write it. Well, that's not the key question. The key question is, can you sit down and write it? Would you try? And then, of course, they're hung up by style and technique. They're hung up by how do I split a page for a television script or something like that, which is hardly of the essence. It's story that counts. It's heart, it's feeling, it's reality, it's legitimacy, it's authenticity, it's honesty. It's the capacity for the printed word or the spoken word to move you. These are the key things, not if you know how to split a script or if you know how a screenplay or do you know what a camera direction is, this sort of thing. You can learn that in a trade school, I'm sure, and probably in 7 days. I don't think that he can enjoy total license to just, throw mud balls on the wall and say that is art. I think there has to be certain legitimate criteria which govern a form. But let's say that he must not preoccupy himself with commas and adjectives and the rest of this stuff, so long as a whole idea can be created. And this passing remark of my own, in terms of creativity, I think the most singularly oft asked question is one that Doris asked me. What do you do? How do you do it? How do you create it? I find it very difficult. I think Doris has mentioned this a couple of times. In truth, you will always find it difficult. The creation of an idea, the following of a story germ, the building up of a plot, the creating of people, of flesh and blood character, these are not easy things. They're extremely difficult, but conversely, don't be put off by the fact that this month you can't do it and next month is maybe even harder. This is, if not a lifetime process, it's awfully close to it. The writer broadens, becomes deeper, becomes more observant, becomes more tempered, becomes much wiser over a period of time passing. It is not something that is injected into him by a needle. It is not something that comes on a wave of flashing explosive light one night and say, huzzah, eureka, I've got it, and then proceeds to write the great American novel in 11 days. It doesn't work that way. It's a long, tedious, tough, frustrating process. But never, ever be put aside by the fact that it's hard. If it weren't hard, everybody would be a writer, and we'd have nothing but books. Slovenly, grubby, filthy, heavy, gudgy books weighting our world down. The fact that it is a very selective and a very challenging process, unique to a few, is what makes literature so valuable and so wonderful. Well, you've been fine. Thank you, all of you, very much.
I love that stuff. Okay. All right. I think I may have figured out this video, so we're going to try this again. And rest assured, I'm not going to waste a lot of time trying. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then we'll just start our next presentation. But I think I may have figured it out. So let's see. Fingers crossed. Yay.
Hey there, Serling fans. Hello to everybody at the Forum Theater in Binghamton, New York. My name is Shelley Young, and you might know me from social media as Shelley McKay Young, as I run or oversee most of the Twilight Zone Facebook groups, as well as one based on the Loner TV series and another called The Girl Who Loves Rod Serling. That's me. I am a member of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. I have been for several years, but I was invited to become a board member in 2021, and I'm here in that official capacity today to welcome you to SerlingFest 2024, a Serling Centennial Celebration. I'm so excited that you're all there this weekend from all over the world. Hello to my good friends and my fellow Canadians. I hope you have a wonderful time together, meeting new friends or catching up with old friends. And most of all, celebrating the life, times, and works of Rod Serling. I'm sad that I can't be there this weekend to celebrate with you. Rest assured, my heart is there with you guys in Binghamton, and I'll be thinking of you all weekend. Many thanks to everybody, all the fans who donated towards the statue and helped us make it a reality. It's been a long time coming, and Rod Serling certainly deserves this honor. I know he would be humbled to know that it's in his hometown of Binghamton at Recreation Park, and I'm sure he would be pleased. I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait for all of you to see it too. I would like to thank my fellow board members as well for putting together SerlingFest 2024 and making it a huge success. Happy 100th birthday to Rod Serling. Happy 65th anniversary to the Twilight Zone. And thank you all for helping us at the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation keep Rod's memory and legacy alive.
Hello, Rod Serling Festival. As one fan to another, I know that you guys are embarking on probably the best weekend you've had in a long time. SerlingFest 24 is going to be great. I wish I could be there, but as you can probably see from all this stuff, my wife and I are literally packing at this moment and about to move to a new place, so I can't be there with you. But as you can probably tell from my grayish hair, I'm old enough to have actually seen the first premiere episode of Twilight Zone. I was about 12 years old when it came on the air, and I've been a Rod Serling fan forever since then, and written several articles on his work. I taught his work in my courses at Ithaca College, and in about 2009 joined the Rod Serling Foundation, and I've been on the board ever since. That was a great privilege, and as I pack, I'm just making sure I have all my important stuff here. All my Twilight Zone episodes and scripts, and they're all going in the box. So I hope you have a great time this weekend. Try to take the time to absorb all that you can about Rod and his work. And on Sunday, even though I won't be there, I'm sure there'll be a tear in my eye as I think about unveiling of that statue and what he meant to the world and to the media and to Binghamton.
Hi, this is Frank Santopadre, and I'm a television writer and the former co-host and producer of Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast, which was a pop culture podcast. We did over 600 episodes for 7 years, and among our guests were Ann Serling and Nick Parisi, who invited me to make this short video and say a few words about Mr. Serling. And so I'm flattered to have been asked, so I'm going to say a couple of words. The more research that I did, the research that I did for that particular episode, but also research that I did on the man, you realize, of course it's been said that from suffering comes great art, but you realize how much this man channeled his trauma and his grief from his war experiences into his work and into his writing. And it is sad in a way, and yet culturally we benefited from it because and you can Google this yourself. It didn't take a great amount of research to realize that so much of the Twilight Zone, which I'll just talk about very briefly, was informed by the man's war experiences. And you look at these anti-war episodes, and I have a short list of the ones we've all seen. I mean, The Quality of Mercy, and In Praise of Pip, and The Shelter, and Third from the Sun, and so many others. The man was, as has been said, again, by others, not only ahead of his time, but his work is timely. And we're still dealing with these issues. They haven't gone away, the things that Rod Serling wrote about and cared about, the horrors of war and censorship and totalitarianism and paranoia and fear of other and prejudice and bigotry and lack of civility. And again, I could go to The Obsolete Man and The Shelter and The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street and episodes that I'm sure you've all discussed. So many of these things still plague us as societies and as a species. As a kid, I watched The Twilight Zone and enjoyed it as a wonderfully constructed show with surprise endings and twists. Didn't realize until I became an adult what this man was writing about, and didn't realize I was watching a show that was the work of a humanist and a moralist and a pacifist, if I may say. So let me just thank again Nick for inviting me and for being a part of the podcast that we did, which you can all find, a wonderful episode that I'm proud of. And of course, Anne, love goes out to both of you, and it was an honor to be asked to do this, to record a short tribute to a great artist and a man who graced us with so many gifts. So, and a personal note again, thank you to Nick and to Anne, and my best to all. Have a wonderful time with this important celebration. Wish I could be there.
I'm Wayne Gladstone, author of the Internet Apocalypse trilogy of novels on Thomas Dunn Books, and former host of the short-lived Twilight Zone podcast, Intangible Quarter, which gave me the honor of interviewing people like Anne Serling, Mark Dawidziak, and Nick Parisi. I've been a Twilight Zone fan since I was a little boy. I've had this poster since I was 8. Rod Serling has always affected me deeply, and not just because I am also a short New York Jew partial to suits. When my first novel was written, some people compared the protagonist, the unreliable narrator who confronts himself and reclaims lost memories, to characters in books like Fight Club or Shutter Island. But the truth is, Twilight Zone episodes like Nervous Man in a $4 Room, Night of the Jockey, Nightmare as a Child were all far greater influences, as was the influence of Rod Serling's prose. To this day, his words and rhythms, for me, are the sound of earnest profundity. What simple truth is supposed to sound like. And that's why I think it's a little unfortunate the way Twilight Zone has entered the public consciousness in maybe a slightly too limited a way, as a show about a dark karmic force that inflicts punishment on sinners. There are certainly episodes like that, great episodes like The Masks or Death's Head Revisited, but they're actually in the minority. For me, The Twilight Zone will always be a show about faith. The faith to believe that miracles are possible, like Big Tall Wish, or the faith necessary to overcome fear, as Rod preaches at the end of The Gift. The faith that perhaps even the unloved, or only unloved, for a short time, as is said in 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. Or the show's just overriding faith that there is something bigger than all of our worst inclinations, whether that's karma, dumb luck, or basic human kindness, all of which are in the Twilight Zone and, as Rod would say, wherever people walk, God's green earth. So happy 100th birthday to Rod Serling, and happy anniversary to The Twilight Zone.
Hi, I'm Mick Garris, among other things, the creator of the Masters of Horror TV series. I've also directed episodes of Amazing Stories, Freddy's Nightmares, Tales from the Crypt, and none of these shows would have been possible without the inspiration of the great Rod Serling. But what's particularly special to me about The Twilight Zone, which of course I embraced in my youth and love to this day, is that when I was in high school, I interviewed Rod Serling for my school paper. I was maybe 16 years old. My first interview was Ray Bradbury, and my second was Rod Serling. And it was inspiring and fascinating and fantastic. And I just feel lucky to have had a little bit of that stardust twinkle off of Rod Serling and into my heart. And I wish all of you a great time. I wish I could be there. And I can't think of a more deserving recipient of this fantastic event.
Hi, I'm TV critic David Bianculli. I'm on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. I've been a TV critic since the 70s, and I'm supposed to say something it's my pleasure to say about Rod Serling. So first of all, I wrote a book a few years ago where I interviewed 30 of the people that I thought did the best work in all of television, and I asked them what inspired them. And without any prompting from me, more of them said The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling. It doesn't matter whether they were doing drama or comedy, that was it. So that's one thing. Another thing is that Rod Serling is still one of the few iconic television people that is still known out there. What he did on The Twilight Zone and a little bit in Night Gallery is still iconic. And he's still known. The Twilight Zone is still known. And in this fractured universe of television, that's not easy. And then finally, and this is a little bit personally, he was the first person I saw on television who was a writer. And it just seemed so glamorous. He seemed so smart that it inspired me. It inspired lots of better people than me. But his place in television has not been eroded, and I don't think it ever will.
I'm Frank Spotnitz. I'm a writer and producer. My credits include The X-Files, The Man in the High Castle, Medici, and many others. And I'm honored and delighted to be here today to celebrate the great Rod Serling at SerlingFest and the unveiling of his statue. I was tickled to see that Rod Serling's The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street episode of Twilight Zone made it to number 11 on Rolling Stone's list of the 200 greatest episodes of television ever made. But at the same time, seeing it placed at number 11 made me realize once again the impossibility of such lists. Because if we're being honest, just about any show on that list wouldn't be there were it not for Rod Serling and The Twilight Zone. I want to read you a quote. This thought was originally, or most commonly, attributed to Isaac Newton, but in fact, the internet tells me that it goes back to somebody called Bernard of Chartres in the 12th century. But it applies to great storytellers just as surely as it applies to great scientists. And here's what Bernard said: "We are like dwarves sitting on the shoulders of giants. We see more and things that are more distant than they did, not because our sight is superior or because we are taller than they, but because they raise us up, and by their great stature add to ours." That is what Rod Serling did for television. With his ambition, his intelligence, and his humanity, he made us see the possibilities of what television storytelling could be and changed the medium forever. Thank you.
Hi, my name's John Logan, and as a screenwriter myself, it's a pleasure to get to talk about one of my heroes, Rod Serling. For many reasons. I think mostly for me, the incredible range of his work, from obviously The Twilight Zone and Night Gallery to Planet of the Apes, 7 Days of May, Requiem for a Heavyweight. Rod Serling could write in every genre. But there was one thing unique about Rod, which is he always did it with purpose. He was an ethical, moral writer, and his writing meant something, always. Thank you, Rod Serling.
Hi, my name's Morgan Neville, and I'm a director, and I've made a lot of documentaries and other things, and I'm a huge fan of Rod Serling. You know, as a boy, I think I discovered The Twilight Zone on Channel 11 in Los Angeles, and it was something that came from such another dimension that I just was sucked in. It was something that I slowly worked my way through, I think, every episode. You know, Night Gallery later was something that stuck with me. And there was something about the storytelling and the way of seeing the world that I just loved. You know, it wasn't until, you know, maybe 25 years ago, there was a PBS documentary about Mr. Serling. And I remember loving that and learning more about his activism, his interest in human rights and, you know, race and politics. And it inspired me to go back and go even deeper into his story. So it is something that still stays with me. We were just working on a project this month where we had a lot of discussions about Twilight Zone and about a kind of perspective and a way of writing narrative and narration that Rod Serling did. And so the influence is perennial, let me put it that way. Anyway, I hope you have the most wonderful celebration. And again, thank you, Rod.
Hi, Bill Mooney here. The word genius gets tossed around quite a bit. But when it's applied to Rod Serling, it's absolutely deserved. The man was a one-of-a-kind voice, a brilliant writer, an important writer, and a true visionary, and a nice guy. I feel truly blessed that I got to know him a little bit. I'm so happy that I worked on 3 of the Twilight Zone shows, and I think those shows have certainly stood the test of time as excellent quality television from the golden era of TV. I remember clearly how everyone on the crew and other actors on those episodes were so happy when Mr. Serling came onto the sets. Everyone from the various departments was anxious to speak with him about upcoming episodes or upcoming scenes. And he was a very light presence on the set, not a dark, brooding presence at all, but a very relaxed and light presence. So, 100 years since the birth of Rod Serling. Well, it's a good thing. It's a real good thing. And we all should keep thinking real good thoughts about him.
Carol Burnett here. I had the sheer joy and pleasure of knowing and working with Rod Serling. The first time I met him was when he was a guest on the Gary Moore variety show, where I was a regular. This was back in 1962, I think it was. And Rod was a guest, and we did a takeoff on Twilight Zone, which was a sketch written by Neil Simon. And we had such fun doing it. And then after the show, a whole bunch of us went bowling. Rod was a pretty good bowler. Anyway, we hit it off really well. And a few weeks later, I got a wonderful call from him asking me if I would be a guest on Twilight Zone. He was writing an episode that he wanted me to be in called Cavender is Coming, and it featured Jesse White as a somewhat tarnished angel. And so I flew to California and I did the show, and we just had the best time. I just loved him. He was such fun and such a gentleman and sweet, kind. And I think the last time I saw him was when he came to a taping of my show, the Carol Burnett Variety Show. And with him, he brought his darling little daughter, Anne. And I think it's a wonderful tribute now that he's got a statue. Oh, how great. In his hometown. And I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous celebration. And I send his family, all of you, my love, and my love to Rod.
Worth the wait. Right? I hope you took two things away from that, or more than two things, but I hope you took two things away from that. One, how much do we love Carol Burnett? And two, Rod was a pretty good bowler. That was the most important piece of information there. So our next presentation is scheduled for 11:45. So we're going to take a little break. We got 7 minutes when we hit the bathroom if you need to and everything. We're back at 11:45 with the Twilight rounds with Chris in a little bit. Thanks.